In the security news this week, Apple, the UK, and data protection. You can get pwned really fast. Australia says no Kaspersky for you. The default password is on the internet. Topological qubits, dangerous AI tools. Old software is not just old, but vulnerable too. Tearing down sonic walls. CWE is good, but it could be great. Updating your pie hole. You should watch Zero Day, or should you? My non-spoiler review will tell you. No more DBX, hello SBAT. And I love it when the chat logs of secret, not so secret ransomware groups are leaked. All that and more on this episode of Paul's Security Weekly. This is a Security Weekly production for security professionals by security professionals. Please visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to all the shows on our network. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where exploits run wild, packets aren't the only things getting sniffed, and the cocktails flow steady. It's Paul's Security Weekly. Paul's Security Weekly is supported by Bitwarden, the trusted solution for password, passkey, and secrets management. Bitwarden empowers everyone to create and manage strong and unique credentials across all accounts and devices. With enterprise SSO integration, end-to-end encryption, and secure autofill capabilities, Bitwarden defends against phishing attacks and data breaches. Strengthen your security posture with tools built to protect what matters most. Learn more at securityweekly.com/Bitwarden. Coming to you from Purgatory Studios in semi-high definition compliments of Darth Vader himself, this is Paul's Security Weekly, episode number 863, being recorded on Wednesday, February 26th, 2025. I'm, of course, Paul Asadorian, joined by Mr. Josh Morpett. Josh, welcome.
Hey, always a pleasure to be here, and it's always interesting when Jeff joins or doesn't,
and then can't
or
join.
Something.
Yes,
yeah,
technical difficulties have plagued Jeff. We miss you dearly, Jeff.
We miss your PCI dearly, Jeff.
I know. Mr. Sam Bound is here with us. Sam, welcome.
Good evening. Glad to be here.
Mr. Lee Neely is here with us.
Howdy, everybody. Good to be here.
Lee Neely, the retired. That's what it says in your... How is retirement treating you, my friend?
It's really good. I was just telling a friend, you can sit there and do stuff on your to-do list, or you can take a nap, or you can read a book.
It's awesome.
And I have the same 5 things on my what I got done last week list.
Yes. Yes. Sounds amazing, dude. I'm reading a book, actually. I'm reading Microcontroller Exploits by Travis Goodspeed. Highly recommended. I'm only through like the first maybe chapter or so, but already really digging it. His advice is something I would love to share with the audience because it's something that I know, like, I don't always practice what I preach or what I know I should be doing. Is like, if you're going to be attacking some kind of microcontroller or embedded type system, he's like, you should develop on it first. Even if that's a hello world, get the development kit, figure out how it works, write some code for it, and then go through and attack the device. And I don't always do that, but when I have done that, I think the results are better. So already sound advice from that book. Travis is awesome. We've had him on the show in the past. So
I mean, Travis is just blatantly awesome.
Yeah. But the book is so cool. It's kind of like a manuscript or a notebook, and the margins are really big, so you can take notes. So it's just a very, very well done from soup to nuts in that book.
Have you ever seen a book that he's actually read? Not written, read. It looks like it was worked over by a guy with a baseball bat. So the margins are, because that's what he does.
That's awesome. Well, and he did that in his book. That's awesome. I love it. I also love it when chat logs leak. Wow. Have you guys looked at the Black Basta ransomware group's chat logs? Yeah, it's just, well, they're in Russian. So there's that.
My Russian's kind of rusty.
Yeah, well, fortunately, I work with people that's not as much of a challenge for a lot of reasons. So I've got a little more insights maybe than some. I mean, I'm sure some have also translated it. And who leaked it? I forgot who. Someone created a chat GPT, a GPT in chat GPT. It's in the link in the show notes at the very bottom. The Ars Technica article by Dan Gooden is Black Basta GPT, which you can. So a GPT is like a, I don't know how do you describe that? What those are? Perplexity calls them spaces. ChatGPT calls them GPTs. What is a term we would use to call, like, they're kind of like plugins, but not really. I don't think that does it justice.
Well, it's an artificial personality, isn't it?
Well, it's like a contextualized chat. I call it. I know that's how because it's not really training, because you want to use the word training.
Oh, it's adding extra. Oh, it's adding extra data like retrieval augmented
Context.
Generation. Then, yeah,
yes,
context.
Right. Context. Yeah,
yeah. It's a help.
That's what Microsoft Copilot does. Yeah,
right. Yeah, so you can use that to ask it questions, and I did, but I got better results when I was working with my coworkers on this. We're hoping to produce a podcast on the Below the Surface podcast next week to talk about some of our findings that we have with this, because it's super interesting. So some of the things that I will share are, well, there's Gray Noise and Volncheck pulled the CVEs and did the CVE analysis. And we're like, well, in these chat logs, they were talking about exploiting these particular CVEs. And that's cool. But there's a lot more to it than just CVEs, right? I mean, the CVE work is important, don't get me wrong, but there's a lot more in there. So the deeper analysis shows they're targeting network devices, VPNs, and other devices, including printers. They break in, they scan the internal networks, right? Which is something you should detect, but a lot of people don't. They do brute force attacks, like basically all the things we tell you to pay attention to, but somehow there's a competing list of priorities for your security program, and the attackers are going to go to like, what's the lowest priority in your list? And a lot of these things, like securing network devices, VPNs, and printers, it's super hard. Two, it gets a lower priority for a lot of different reasons. So there's a lot of credential kind of password spraying, default password kind of stuff mentioned in there. So like, you need to manage all of your credentials, which is super hard, and not everyone does, which is why attackers will go after that, right? And you need to patch all the things, which we say is, pretty much impossible these days to keep up with all the patches. But yeah, this is where the attackers are preying on, right? Like, what haven't you patched? That's where they're going to go. I mean, we've always said that on the show.
What's going through my head is, I don't know how many guys have you talked to somebody say, I don't need to worry about this X computing device, whether it's a printer or whatever, because it's not got anything sensitive on it, right? It's just a printer. And I'm like, it's a node on the internet.
Right. Or in your internal
network.
network.
That, like, to your grandparents or to seniors. It's like, I'm focused on seniors because Shelly and I are doing a presentation next week at our local senior center on being safe online and some other things. But I'm thinking, if I can't have that make sense to a senior, it's like, it'll go past. How many people will just, right? You got to translate.
Oh, yeah, it's horrible.
I know you're good at that, Josh.
Well, I always have to make an analogy, and sometimes it's easy and sometimes it's hard.
Oh.
And so the analogy I use for printers is simple. And I've got a lot of them, but the analogy I normally use for printers is basically a printer is a door. Every device that has a connection to the internet is a door into your house. A printer has just as big a door as a computer.
Yeah.
The thing with a printer that prints paper, right? We were talking about this right before the show, right? Is it prints stuff. And so I'm not motivated to, well, let me back that up, because Josh has a great point, because we hate printers. When it wants to, it prints stuff.
Yeah.
Right. And if you really needed to print something, it's probably not going to print it. Like, chances are
cyan ink out low on cyan ink, will not print, but it's black and white. Cyan ink out, cannot print.
I'm not super motivated to update the firmware on my printer, because at the end of the day, when I do get it to print, it puts ink on paper, or burns the ink on paper, right? Whatever you want to phrase it, it gives me a printout. And a firmware update's not, it's still going to print something on a piece of paper. 3D printers, on the other hand, maybe I get better functionality. I get, there's a lot of nuances to 3D printers. So I'm much more motivated to update the firmware on my 3D printers than I am on my thing that prints on paper.
So I'm going to point out that everybody here is old and probably remembers in the 1990s when you could add PostScript to your printer and you could add different cartridges of memory to your HP LaserJet, and you could do different things with it at that point, and it was so friggin' cool.
Right.
Well, and they still have storage, so you can have persistent things get in there. They're connected. They have a path to the internet.
And by the way, they store your documents. Is Mopier? Does anybody remember Mopier?
Why does that sound familiar?
Multiple original pages, infinite electronic reproductions.
Yeah.
It's a hard drive in your printer that stores your print jobs, so you can actually access them, and then just instead of saying print this document, you can just say, hey, print document 15, and it'll print. So if you have an HR package, you just press a button and it prints the HR package out. You don't have to send it or anything.
Oh, I see.
But the point is, it keeps copies of every print job sent to it.
Well, I mean, and let's go to VPNs too. Utility devices that have to be exposed to the internet that have something to do with credentials. People need to log into the VPN, so there's credentialed access to them on the user end.
Yep.
And that's it's a favorite target, right? I mean, there's some models and brands of VPN devices where I've done some analysis, working a little more on this. There's like 80,000 of them on Shodan.
Whew.
And, the vendors are like, well, everything's fine. Like, just either don't expose it to the internet or like make sure you keep up with all the updates and everything's fine. My coworker's quote today was, everything is not fine. Because here's like a whole list of these VPN devices along with credentials for them that came out of the chat logs for the Black Basta ransomware group, right? And so we've got some work to do. But we're just scratching the surface, I think, as to what's in here. I love this because it's fantastic threat intelligence, right? There's a lot of different types of threat intelligence, but essentially being a spy inside the chat room of actual threat actors is such great threat intelligence for us. We did the same thing. It was before I joined Eclipsium, and I forget which group it was now. Leaked their chat logs, and the Eclipsium researchers also observed that they were going after UEFI targets, or it might have been Intel CSME or Intel ME AMT technology that they were talking about in there, right? So this is great threat intelligence. I love it when this happens, and we should all learn from it, read the articles that are published about it, and take that back into our organizations and make sure that we're prioritizing the right things, because this is what the attackers are actually doing, or at least talking about doing, right? So this is where I want to be, because the attackers aren't talking about it. That's an indicator that maybe it's not a higher priority as I perceive. So if they're not talking about the things that are the highest priority to you, maybe you need to readjust your priorities. And again, this is just one group too, so don't take that necessarily as gospel.
Not necessarily gospel. It gives you things to think about if you considered that these are targets.
We may know they're targets, but they're really targets. Right? They're active.
There's some damn good stories tonight.
Yeah, what else you want to talk about, Josh?
Well,
I really want to go. Whose is this? Is this Sam's? This is Sam's stories about the Majorana
Oh yeah.
chip.
Yeah.
This is beyond huge. Sam, do you want to start? I'm sorry, Sam. It's yours. Please go ahead.
No,
This is the quantum computing story.
Yeah. I'm not so sure how big it is. I mean, the point is they have a new type of qubit, and it uses these Majorana waves, which are a way of vibration inside a special component. But so that immediately puts them like 2 decades behind the existing quantum computing systems that use things like the spin of a single atom, which have already moved further. But the thing about this is it supposedly will scale to put 1 million qubits on a chip, and the other techniques don't. So it's like having the first little transistor that you can then put millions of transistors on a chip if it works. But all they've done is show that it passes the first test of being a qubit. They haven't even demonstrated entanglement or anything yet. So this is really just the first baby step.
Do they have do they have devices that they're prototyping this on?
They made
have devices.
They made a prototype with 1 qubit, and
that's the video I saw.
And they have another one they're making with 4 qubits. And if they're able to make that work and it scales up to 1 million, then
then Sam will disappear.
Wait, he's back.
And look, he's back. And he's probably hooked to the wrong microphone. But what caught my eye...
I was going to ask, are they putting 1 million qubits on that small little board?
No. But that doesn't matter. Go ahead, Lee. I'm sorry.
So the thing that caught me, the sexy thing about this thing is that The error rate on this is only 1%. The current problem with quantum computing is the error rate is huge, and I bet you Josh could tell me the average error rate, or Sam could. But the starting off with a much lower error rate that they believe is correctable is because right now that's the thing that's holding quantum back is the errors coming out of the CPU. It's not reliable enough. But they also say things like we're operating at absolute zero. That's not exactly practical everywhere. That's pretty dang cold.
Well, the colder you get a standard quantum system today, the less error prone it is.
Yeah, okay. Fair.
With the Majorana superconductor, which is a topological superconductor, which, by the way, physics majors are pissed.
Wow.
Wait, why? Hold on, wait, go back.
They've been trying to... sorry?
Go ahead, Josh.
They've been trying to build a topological superconductor for 20 or 30 years minimally, and Microsoft, with no warning, just, boom, says, oh, we did it, and walks away.
Damn
and
it.
Like, okay, when are we going to see how you did it? Like, never? That's trade secret. So physics people are like, holy shit, we're pissed off, because you realize they're talking about some effectively room temperature superconductors, which means that the cost of a quantum computer is now infinitely less.
Yes.
The error correction is significantly less, which means that they will be more accurate. And the problem with quantum computers is not the computing, it's the error correction.
Correct.
They are so prone to the slightest flick of an electron will just knock the whole sucker out of whack. And so they have to have a massively redundant system to get any hope of getting correct answers.
Oh, I see. Sam, are you back? Are you back, Sam?
I think he's still, he's muted. He's still working on some technical hookup.
Okay.
Because like I said, the thing that's exciting to me was the lower error rate, and it's just and keep an eye on it. I mean, you're not going to go buy one anytime soon. I mean, they're at least what was it, 2 to 5 years out?
They said in the article like 2032, something like that.
But can you believe that's only 7 years from now?
Oh, shut up! I'm old. Shut up.
Exactly.
But,
I feel it.
The point is that I've been saying within 3 to 7 years we're going to have reasonably competent quantum computing. At this point, they're saying within 3 to 7 years, 7-ish years, whatever, 7 to 10 years, we're going to have quantum decryption. That's a big difference.
Yeah.
So if we have quantum decryption in 7 years, let's just call it 10 years. If we have quantum decryption in 10 years, there is a crap ton of information that is in danger out there.
Yeah. So
because how much of your information is dangerous for 10 years?
Right. So if you catch stories about quantum, you'll see references to capture now, decrypt later.
Harvest now, decrypt. Yes.
Yeah, excuse me. Exactly what you said. Implying that, it's strongly encrypted now and I can't reverse it, but I'll brute force it in 7 years and it should still be useful, right?
So
useful
what I've been
information,
telling people
is
there's something called a data half-life. And this, I made that up and my wife hates it. So I'm insisting everybody use it. And
I ain't paying your royalties, buddy.
It's okay. It's okay. I'm not asking for royalties. I just want attribution, damn it.
Okay.
But the data half-life is a column in your data classification table. And you break out, like your restricted data, you break it out into libraries. And so I have restricted personal health information, restricted personal credit card information, PCI, restricted trade secret, restricted whatever, okay? And so you break it out into libraries and then you have a data half-life. How long does it take for that information to degrade to where I don't care about it anymore? And so this concept of, is there any information that's longer than 10 years to the data half-life, is something that people are going, oh crap, I never thought about it that way.
Sam, you're back.
Yeah, I'm back, but it sounds like Josh has got the main point, which is if everything goes well, then they say it might be a significant working quantum computer in maybe 7 years. But there's still a lot of obstacles on the way, so it's uncertain. But anyway, the point is we need to switch to quantum-resistant encryption now, because it's going to take years to make the transition.
But quantum-resistant encryption is not a finger snap. I mean, yes, we need to start doing it. We need to start trying it.
It's not. There are a few algorithms now approved, but it's, you have to re-encrypt everything and you have to learn how to use these new algorithms and libraries and all that. So it's going to take years.
No, it's not. No, it's not. I'm absolutely, Sam, I'm sorry. I disagree with you entirely. Do you know why?
No.
Okay. because when you're old, like all of us, you remember when we moved from TLS 1.0 or SSL 3.0 to TLS 1 to TLS 1.1 to TLS 1.2, right? That's all it's going to be. It's going to be a cipher suite upgrade.
Yeah.
Well,
And as
Majority,
for the
majority of it is data in transit, right? Not data at
Yeah.
rest.
well,
data at
and
rest
it will
is
be
fine. It
updated.
doesn't matter.
no,
Sure.
but the point is you have to define what you mean by moving. The higher tech companies will move quickly. There'll be a bunch of people with old hardware and old software that take a lot longer
valid.
to move up. So it'll be like the transition to IP version 6 or something. It'll be slow and a bunch of
That's
people will be lagging behind.
cultural.
Yeah.
What transition
That's
to
cultural, not
IPv6?
technological. Let's be clear. Does that make sense? Are we in agreement on that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's the same as anything
to
else.
me, it's a compatibility problem. It's not
Right.
that I can't get
Yeah.
an HSM that produces quantum
Well, let's
based
hope,
crypto.
and let's hope that people's technology gets mostly cycled out by that
Right.
time.
Well,
Like I'm thinking
well,
about
I mean-
phones. Like let's hope in 10 years,
Mhm.
most
You're already
people have
using it if you've got an
most
iPhone.
people have a new phone, right? Or at least don't have an iPhone that doesn't. Are there iPhones that like don't support the new?
Yeah.
There are
Yeah.
the ones that Apple
Right.
aren't supporting anymore, right? Let's hope
Right, exactly.
a lot
But if
of
you've
those
got a
get
modern
swapped out.
iPhone, which means I think a 13 on up, I think, don't quote me on
Yeah.
that.
I mean,
You're already
this
using
one does
post-quantum
the
crypto.
quantum on iMessage.
iMessage. Yeah.
And
And if you use Signal, you're using post-quantum crypto already.
there you
What
go.
about your phone? What about your encrypting the phone itself?
Okay,
I
so
think
that's encryption at rest.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
I think it's still
quantum
AES.
decryption is not as good. Quantum decryption is, and I'm bastardizing this,
Right.
but it's exponentially better at asymmetric encryption.
Yes.
Yep.
It is about twice as fast at symmetric encryption.
Yeah. What
so
happens
as
is
long as you're
yeah.
using, go ahead.
If you're
Please.
using AES, you'll have to use AES 256 instead of AES 128. That's all that's going to happen.
Right.
Yeah.
Or yeah, exactly. So, and
Well,
in
I
fact,
mean,
we
you know,
kind
look,
of backed
it's
into my story number 7. By the
It's a
way.
time. Give me 1 second. I just want to say one more thing. It's a
Of
time
course.
factor. With AES 128, prior to quantum, it would take about 5 million years, and I'm roughly simplifying
Good
again,
enough.
to brute force and decrypt AES 128.
Yes.
Okay.
No,
What?
you could never do it with all the computers in the world running for all the time in the world. 2 to the 128 is an impossible number. It's not 5 million years. It's absolutely more than the age of the universe. I object.
Okay. So what's half of the age of the universe?
It's the square
Is that
root.
enough for your?
No, it's the square root. That's the big point.
No. Not with symmetric. It's only half. It's doubling, not
That's
square
right.
rooting.
That's right. So, I mean, the point is a quantum computer could crack by brute force AES 128 with only 2 to the 64 operations, which is doable in the square root of the number.
Barely doable.
Yeah, and that's right. So AES 256 would require 2 to the
It's
128
absolutely not
operations,
doable.
and that you could never do with all the computers in the.
We're on the same page. So effectively, oh God, there he goes again. Effectively, AES 128 is probably still fine for another 20 years. So we've got time to upgrade that stuff to 256. So don't freak about that. Worry about your TLS connections, your SSH keys, and your cryptocurrency wallets. Okay? Those are the places that it matters right now. All right, I'll shut up. Go to your story 7.
Story 7.
My story 7 was simply that Google is now going to be offering quantum signing algorithms for folks through their HSM and KMS. So you can start getting quantum signing certificates through an online
And that's
service
because
provider to start trying.
software, yeah, and that's because software lasts a long time.
Yeah.
And we want to make sure that they can't evil grade anything you know, if you have a long-term support, that could be 3 years or 5 years, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we want to make sure that long-term support software is actually safe. So this is actually really smart of Google. I give them a lot of credit.
But you bring up a great point on downgrading attacks, right? And I'm not sure how or if it applies to the crypto world. Maybe it does in certain circumstances. I had a story. I don't know if I wrote it up, but that was what I wanted to say about that. Was there a lot of downgrade attacks? It might have been the multiple vulnerabilities in Siemens PLCs. Yes, it was. SEC Console had a story, disclosure, and the vulnerability was that the PLCs were allowed to perform firmware downgrades, which made the PLCs vulnerable to the exploitation of previously patched vulnerabilities. And we saw a huge downgrade attack with Microsoft Windows that was presented at Black Hat 2024. I have not read or seen anything that these attacks are actually being used in the wild. However, I think we will reach a time where if the security is pretty good, on the current firmware or software on these devices, but you can easily downgrade them. That's where attackers are going to go. Like, oh, why am I going to go find or buy a brand new shiny new 0-day exploit or spend the resources and time to find one when someone's already created one? I just need to get the target to run that older software so I can exploit it, right? So it's one of the themes that I had in my stories this week is how do we, and we're talking about this actually in a webinar tomorrow, how do we protect our, in my case, firmware, right? Software in general, that by using encryption. And what luxury does that afford you, right? So like my 3 things for protection of devices are some kind of secure boot mechanism, not necessarily UEFI secure boot, but any kind of secure boot on whatever platform it is. There's encryption of the firmware as one thing, and there's also signature validation. And we've seen even recently attacks against all 3 of those mechanisms. But let's force attackers to find those flaws and exploit those flaws rather than not having them at all, right? Like we can't just not use the security controls that are available to us today. And which one of my stories was a couple of them that was the SonicWall one. So this is I don't know where Sam went, but I want everyone to weigh in. And this was my story number 16. So Bishop Fox did a fantastic job of building on others' research and publishing new research on how to decrypt the SonicWall firmware or VMs. Now, if there's an actual physical SonicWall device, they can store the key to decrypt the bootloader firmware, whatever components they want. They can store that very securely. They can store it inside of a TPM, right? And yes, can that be attacked? Sure. Is it easy? Usually not, right? Depending on the implementation. Much harder than if the software firm is just provided because they want the VM. They want people to run their software. So they make available a VM image. They're like, run this on any hardware you want, which is great, right? It should be great for everyone. I can buy my own hardware, or I can buy SonicWalls. SonicWalls wants to see adoption in their software. I don't blame them for that. Any product company wants that. But when they produce the VM image, they are encrypting it. But the key has to be somewhere. And if it's your own hardware, it's not in your hardware. So the article goes through basically extracting the key from the bootloader, right? Which is, usually how this stuff gets broken. And so, like, my question is it worth it? Is it even worth it to encrypt this firmware? Like, I think I'd rather, in my opinion, I'd rather see companies put the development time that they're taking to encrypt their firmware and or software images. I'd rather take that and go squash other bugs, make your software more secure in other ways, not just encrypting the firmware. Because if you're just giving your software and the key is in there somewhere, security researchers are going to find it. I mean, we saw the same thing with Zixel. We've seen it. I've read a number of different research articles where we find the key somewhere, right? Or figure out how to decrypt it somehow. So what is it worth? Is it worth it to decrypt this firmware or software? I don't know. What's your thoughts, guys?
From what you say, I would say not. I mean, if the key is there, then what's the point? That's just a little bit of obscurity to stop weak attackers, but it's not really going to stop strong attackers.
That shows them how to decrypt it, right?
That's valid.
Yeah, this is like, they used to have all DRMs for music, used to just use a fixed static key.
Remember the DECSS
and after a while that key leaked, and then it's all over.
Yes. Yeah, it was DECSS, right. But and that was to protect intellectual property, and that is an argument for why you do want to encrypt that. But also, like, my feeling is from an attacker standpoint, they're attacking it usually once the thing's running and has already been decrypting everything. And they're going to find a remote exploit on it, and the stuff's it's running, so it's decrypted.
Well, what's the point of the encryption anyway? Do you really want
It's a-
confidentiality, or do you just want integrity?
I agree with. I think
think
it's just
just
signing.
signing is what
it's
they
a
want.
validation, right? Signature validation. When we've seen this come into play with microcode, we've seen it come into play with BMCs recently. The signature validation is important. If you can bypass that, that's significant, because then you can run whatever code you want. In firmware encryption does put barriers up into tampering with the firmware. So I have seen that in play as well. Like, I can't just run whatever I want because the firmware is encrypted. So I need to figure out how to decrypt it, put my malicious stuff in it, and then encrypt it in the same way. That was the Space Heater article I think we covered last week or the week before, where the researchers figured out how to do that. So there is some benefit to it. But again, the key is in there. But when we talk about signature validation, that hinges upon you protecting your private key.
Yeah.
So long as you can protect your private key, you can accomplish great signature validation. So the devices are only running the software you intend, and it does prevent against tampering. And I like that. I think that's a huge win. I wish more manufacturers would do it and do it properly, which is where we see if they don't do it, then the software can be tampered with, right? So.
Yeah, this is extremely common that people don't understand cryptography, and they use encryption when they really want signing.
How often are they actually validating the chain of trust on a certificate?
Well, that too.
Wait, you want somebody to have actually like do something? What's wrong with you, Lee?
The certificate path matters.
Well, I don't even think it. But I don't think you need chain of. But for a digital signature, I don't think you need a chain of trust. The point is the public key is known, and it will only verify if it was signed with the private key, which you never see.
Yes, you do.
So you don't really need to have a.
It's the
I don't think you need to have chain of trust.
Under which it was issued.
Oh, you need to be able to fetch the public key.
You also need to know how.
You need to know the public key. You need that connection.
If I have a web page where anybody can self-attest and they get a signature, they're not very strong versus a service where you've got to provide two forms of ID, a pound of flesh, and your firstborn.
You're correct. In the Microsoft's third-party software attestation for secure boot is, I think, Lee, where you're going, right? Where Microsoft will say, "Oh, we'll sign," and drivers are the same way, right? We'll sign it, but you have to validate the software that's being signed, right?
Yeah.
And that's the driver program, and that's the third party.
You understand the whole environment.
Yes.
And I don't want to turn this into a PKI talk. I'm just saying, it's
to allow extensions to that software, Lee, you need a governing body to preserve that chain of trust to go, whatever other components I'm signing should be at the same level of integrity as the main piece of software of the operating system, right? Yeah. It does hinder that, or force the governing body to have some kind of program for attestation and signing, like Microsoft does for drivers, and third-party CA for UEFI.
I mean, I'll take an unknown versus completely not signed code. I mean, I get that, but still, I'd rather have just a known level of integrity and trust across the chain. And
that brings us to Grub.
and what's up with Grub?
Everything leads to Grub.
Deploying enterprise AI, tools like Copilot from Microsoft 365 and Glean are prone to oversharing and data leakage. They lack the in-depth access controls required to ensure that query responses align with users' need to know boundaries. Without proper access controls, these tools accelerate the discovery of improperly secured sensitive files within the organization's M365 environment. Gnostic enables enterprises to safely adopt AI through setting need-to-know based access controls. Learn more at securityweekly.com/Gnostic and see how Gnostic can help stop AI oversharing. Grub 2, so it was Red Hat and Oracle, right, who maintained huge portions of the open source Linux world. Thankfully, had researchers that were looking for vulnerabilities inside of Grub and found a whole handful of them. I was like, oh boy, here we go. So this has several trickling effects because Grub is integral part to many Linux distributions and Linux systems, and has to participate in the secure boot process through shim. And so now, like, if there are, we've seen it in the past, right? Eclipsium researchers had boot hole as an example. If there's a vulnerability in the bootloader, it means it can't be trusted because those vulnerabilities can be exploited and used to bypass secure boot. In fact, if you read the original disclosure that they posted, in each of those CVEs, they describe a few sentences about the vulnerability, and most of them say, and can be used to bypass things like secure boot at the end of them. The interesting thing here for me, and I knew this day would come, and this day is now here, that the big change with respects to UEFI secure boot in this Grub2 vulnerability context is there will be no DBX update. So your secure boot revocation list that's stored in DBX, which is an NVRAM variable, which on most systems has a fixed length of 32 kilobytes, is a fixed length, which means if the revocation list grows really large and we have to revoke, thousands of pieces of software a la Grub that has all these vulnerabilities, we're going to run out of space. So the revocation will only happen via SBAT. This is interesting because your next question is, what is SBAT, right? And so I asked an LLM to help describe it, making sure I got it right. Secure boot advanced targeting, right? The newer mechanism designed to enhance the security of the boot process, particularly for Linux systems. I believe it does exist on Windows systems because I saw that a few months ago. So it says it should work alongside the DBX. So the DBX will still be checked, obviously, but offers more flexibility. Essentially, it's a metadata language for describing multiple pieces of software that should not be trusted in the secure boot process. So you can say things like, all versions of Grub before version 1 dot whatever are not valid. And you can do that in one line in the SBAT configuration. So it allows for that flexibility for us to revoke software at a not necessarily a more granular level, but on like a more easily achievable metadata level to invalidate multiple pieces of software all in one fell swoop. So the next logical question is, now that means secure boot is not potentially at risk on these systems that are running a vulnerable Grub, right? So secure boot will work just fine if you haven't updated the revocation list, you haven't updated the SBAT, you're running a vulnerable version of Grub. It means an attacker can exploit that and gain code execution and bypass secure boot. If you want an example of that, go see our Palo Alto post. Has a video of us doing just that on a Palo Alto device. So then the next logical question is, well, how do I know if I'm vulnerable and how do I keep myself up to date? So I have a couple of Linux commands that are there for starters. Now, these Linux commands will give you the right information, but you have to determine whether you have to interpret that information. You have to interpret the results and go, is that the right SBAT configuration? Is that the right version of Grub? So those two commands that I put in the show notes that everyone can go read. One is a mock util, is the utility on Linux that allows you to interrogate and also create secure boot keys and all that stuff. You can list the SBAT revocations and it'll tell you what the SBAT is, how it's defined on your system. If it comes back with no policy, probably red flag. Could be, not necessarily, but could be a red flag. Also, there is a grub-install -version, gives you your version of Grub on your system. But again, like, I can't tell you right now which versions of Grub are good or not because every Linux distribution is different. The patches are there. So distributions may take the patches and then increment or label the version of Grub in their own way. And so we'll end up with a whole list of versions of Grub that are good or not good, right? Depending on your distribution. So,
yep.
That was,
I had to use grub2-install as opposed to grub-install on my system I'm playing with here.
No, that's good to know.
But your point's still valid.
Oh,
Those do yield results. And whether they're what you want or not is a whole nother conversation.
Yeah, interpreting is a whole different thing.
And I checked for updates, and Grub had updates. So guess what I'm implying?
So
yeah.
So Paul, I had a question when I read this. My first thought is grub is it's only used during boot up. So only if somebody can actually like have physical access to the machine during boot up would they get control. But I see down here they say by hijacking hook functions after module ejection, attacker could execute rogue payloads with bootloader privileges. So could they run arbitrary
I'm not,
code like
it's a great
from you
question, Sam.
browsing
I'm
a
not
web
sure
page
which of those
without a
vulnerabilities
reboot?
could be exploited without a reboot. Many of them, so the answer is I don't know, but
Yeah.
the other bit of information maybe in its place that I'll describe is many of them, and I've seen this with bootloaders recently in the past with vulnerabilities, many of them come from the bootloader code that is meant to read different file systems. And you'll see that when you read through the CVEs, which should, because it's a pretty cool read, that much of the vulnerabilities are when Grub has to read a file from a certain file system or interact with any kind of file system, that's where the vulnerable code lies. And I believe we saw that in U-Boot and several other bootloaders as well. And it's when they have to interface, right? Because I think they're trying to keep the bootloader code as small as possible, right? As lean as possible, but they have to add this functionality to do things like interface with file systems. There's another vulnerability in there for Grub 2 in this recent disclosure where it reaches out over the network because you have network boot that's enabled in bootloaders. U-Boot and Grub 2 both actually support this, right? Reach out over the network to get things like files. Well, they don't necessarily check the bounds of the configuration being read from that file across the network. And so there's a buffer overflow in it. So if you're network booting and you're on the same segment, is how they state it in there, that could be problematic. So there is a network attack path in there. I'm not sure if you can do it without rebooting, but boot hole was a good example of configuration files. So inside the configuration files where you put your exploit code basically, right? Because it would read something from the configuration file. So
the obvious attack is you poison some files. I'm not quite sure how you do that. And then you force a reboot. And now you have a bootkit. You have control of the machine. I wonder, but
yes,
I mean, would you need administrative privileges to change those files you need to
depending
change?
Depending on which files we're talking about and how the distribution has protected those files determines. But typically what I've seen, Sam, is you need root level privileges to modify these files. Correct.
So this is like a rootkit. After you already have administrative control over one box, you now make a persistent remote control session.
Well, you're getting pre-kernel
the main thing you're
access.
getting here is persistence.
So
you're
if
not
there
really
are kernel
getting more
protections in the operating system, you are executing code before those protections take place. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, okay.
Correct.
That's right. You're elevating yourself up to like
so bootkits
while
would
booting
exploit
permissions.
these vulnerabilities, right? And bootkit is after UEFI, but before the operating system in that state of your boot process where the bootloader has control, but your operating system does not. And UEFI has done the exit boot services function call to go, I'm done, bootloader, here you go. And then bootloader goes, I'm going to do my thing, and then I'm going to instantiate the kernel.
Yeah. So you get kernel privileges.
That's Grub. Has anyone, on a much less technical note, has anyone watched the new TV series on Netflix that came out this week called 0 Day starring Robert De Niro?
No, how is it?
So I don't want to give away any spoilers. So this is like my non-spoiler review. If you want spoilers, I mean, we'll do it after the show. I want to spoil it for any listeners. So there's not as much tech in it as I would have liked, but again, I'm a nerd. Many of us are nerds. Most of us are going to watch that and probably go, I wish there was a little more tech in it. There's a lot of other elements in it. It takes on a lot.
Is there a GUI written in Visual Basic to track an IP address?
I don't want to spoil it. There is a scene that does display technical things, and I'll let all of you watch the show and see if you're at the point that I'm at. There is a point where they have to decode encoded communications. I won't really, not really encrypted. It's more decoding that they're doing of messages. So that is a cool part of it. I wish Jeff were here because I wanted to tell Jeff that. And I was kind of saving it for the show, and then he couldn't join. But it's I don't want to spoil it, so it's something that Jeff would very much appreciate, and also be like the first one to point out any inaccuracies in the show.
Yeah.
Is there anywhere?
Yeah, no, it's nothing about PCI.
It's the first thriller based on PCI.
No, I think you mentioned Hollywood hacking or whatever.
Yeah, so that scene could be. I'd almost have to watch it again to determine the level of Hollywood hacking, because it goes through very, very, very fast, and I haven't gone back to analyze those specific scenes. I'm anticipating that someone is going to watch those scenes and then do like a deep dive into just those scenes and pick it apart. Right? That's my guess.
If there isn't somebody having a gun held to their head while receiving a sexual favor,
nope, doesn't have
60
that.
seconds to break into the FBI.
Doesn't have that.
We've all seen that movie.
It does. It is kind of all over the place in terms of like the sub themes of disinformation, mental health, drug abuse, politically motivated executions, spies, tech giants. So it bites off a little more than it can chew, in that respect.
But it sounds like it's enough to keep you interested. I mean,
yeah, I liked it. The critics hated it.
Person's gonna just check out if you've got somebody doing real, honest to God hacking. It's not gonna hold the average audience.
I've knew about this show, and not to be confused with the Taiwanese show, also called 0 Day.
Whoops.
That is a Taiwanese TV show that will be released in May of this year. That is goes through a cyber attack from China against Taiwan, and it's very, very controversial, of course, in China. And I'm anxious to see if we can if we can watch that series, because that sounds super interesting. And so I follow the term 0 Day in my feeds, and so I've seen articles about the Taiwanese show and the one starring Robert De Niro. At one time, I thought they were the same show because they have the same name, and I was just like reading the headlines, and I'm like, well, that's not the 0 Day that I'm looking for, right? But my feed is filled now with in that particular search I have in references to this show, and the critics hate it. I mean, I can just tell by skimming the headlines, the critics hate it. But it's wildly popular on Netflix, and people seem to like it. I think everyone, if you're in cybersecurity, getting into cybersecurity, you should definitely watch it, right? Like, it is worth watching. You're going to get something out of it. I think it's a good show to watch. So they mentioned TAO. While TAO has been rebranded, I'll give them credit for mentioning it, correctly, referencing it in the show. I mean, they could have gone into more detail, but it's kind of like inside baseball, right? The malware attacks. So the premise of the show doesn't really spoil it, right? Because you'll read this in like the Netflix description. Cyber attack takes out like huge amounts of infrastructure in the U.S. And that malware attack is not so far fetched. I think they did a pretty good job of like it's plausible. The one this is sort of a spoiler, but not really. So I'll try not to spoil anything. But the threat actors use AM radio signals to communicate. So if you're a ham radio operator or you're into radio signals, that's going to be super interesting. You're going to have some Google searches you're going to do after that, right? To see exactly what was going on in the show and what devices they were using. I will say one of the devices they use is a real device that you can buy that actually came out not that long ago. So that was kind of neat and really accurate for the show. Although they try to initiate radio communications in places where I'm like, I don't know that would work in the real world, because that is probably like a SCIF or at least a secured facility. Not sure you get radio communications through there, but again, it's just a TV show. So I'm trying not to be too critical of it. Many of the reviews and articles, if you go read those, drag in real world politics, right? Because the show is set in a very political setting, right? Former president, played by Robert De Niro. So just that in and of itself has a very political vibe to it. And a lot of articles are trying to pull in real world politics. I'm like, just stop. Like, that's not productive. And so, yeah, that's my review. So again,
that's cool.
You should watch it, right? Again, if you're in a field or trying to get into a field, it's definitely something you should watch. Also, the acting is fantastic.
Oh, is it?
Dude, Robert De Niro is
he's
one of
awesome.
the most talented actors on the planet, right? And the other all the supporting cast is fantastic as well. You'll recognize some of the actors and actresses in it, and they all do a superb job. Great acting, writing, storyline maybe a little sloppy, a little all over the place, right? But still, again, worth watching for sure.
Can we talk about your story 15? I'm reading that and it's really good.
Yeah.
Actually.
So Jericho has been on a tear writing on his blog, and brings up some great points, and looked at the CWE database and pulled out some interesting little facts. And one of them is that there are over 200 CWEs that are not assigned to any CVE. So there's also CVEs that don't have a CWE. So there's a couple of weird gaps here. So
let's be clear. There's CVE, there's CVSS, there's CWE, there's a lot of
all the C's.
So let's explain CWE if you don't mind.
Common weakness enumeration is an attempt to put a label and a definition on a class of vulnerability or weakness or flaw. Right?
It's a lot of titles so that you can
and there's a lot of I
weaknesses.
think after you read Jericho's article, you're like, well, it's too many, right? But it gets into this whole challenge of labeling and definition. Is this that, or is it the other thing, right? And there's a lot of CWEs that are very close, and so one gets used over the other, and in 200 cases, the other one never gets used. Maybe it's too specific, right, and never gets used. Or maybe it's too general, and something that's a little more specific is the one that always gets used. So we have this problem with CWE. It needs to be fixed, right? We shouldn't have, if we're making a database that is classifying vulnerabilities or weaknesses, in my opinion, they should all be valid and all be used. Right? Because why are we classifying something and then never applying it to an actual vulnerability?
I can see a few not being used because they're rare, but
sure.
The good proportion of them
200 is a lot. I wouldn't have guessed the number being 200, right? But then there's also
Bob down the street when he was coding. He made this mistake. It's going to result in a flaw. You'll see. I need a CWE ahead of time.
Yes. The other thing is the CVEs don't all have CWEs because the enrichment and metadata hasn't taken place, or they were maybe I think Jericho talks about in the article, CWE came after CVE a certain number of certain amount of time. So did we go back and apply them to all of them? Maybe not, but older vulnerabilities are still in play.
Yeah.
Right. I love to pick on the cross-site scripting one that ends up, it's, 7 or 8 years old, that ends up on the CISA KV, because it's still a valid vulnerability. There's still software out there from Cisco that runs this version and has that cross-site scripting. And guess what? Threat actors went after it. And so that older CVE, but the older CVEs, many of them have this problem of the metadata not being up to date or not being accurate, right? Because the other problem we have is the references in these older CVEs go to links that don't exist anymore. And that's a huge problem. So we have this data problem with CWE and CVE that I think improvements would be welcomed by the community, but who's going to do it?
It's a big job. Hell, NIST doesn't even got enough resources to get the analysis for all the CVEs done.
I mean, our tax dollars go to these programs, right? And how do we make sure that they're getting the funding, getting the resources they need to make this an even more valuable resource for the community? I think it's important to have this data, cleaned up.
Yeah,
I think it needs the resources.
I mean, he cites a couple of CWEs that are kind of unused and, for lack of the right term, worthless. But you read, they look like they're created with good intentions, but they just don't get used. But you almost, what do we got to put them in the unicorn category? I'm not sure how you.
Well, you got to create a committee. The committee has to agree. The committee has to vote, right? Should the community weigh in? Do we want a small number of people having the ability to go, no, get rid of all those CWEs?
Yeah, I don't know.
I think we got to work as a team.
And which battle do you want to pick first?
Yeah. Right. Do you want to pick do we get rid of the CWEs that aren't being used? Or I'd rather go after the CVEs that don't have CWEs first.
And the analysis, getting that
Well,
done.
and that would be the logical order of operations, because if you went and classified all of the CVEs with CWEs, you might use some of those 200 that aren't being used today, right? So let's go do that first, and then go back and say, okay, do we really need these CWEs? But it's important.
Yeah, no, it's good. And actually, he does a nice job of talking about what those are for
Mm.
and stuff.
Some
So
of them are, one that he pulls out was specific to like J2EE. It was like specific to a specific software.
well,
It's like you wonder how those things got added in the first place.
Well, there was a time when J2E was more common.
Right. I mean,
But-
it probably still, Java applications are still a thing.
Right.
Like there's millions and millions of line of Java code still running out there.
Right.
We're not going to get away from that.
So but when he references another one that's improper input validation for an LLM, I'm like, how is that different for improper input validation in general? I mean, shouldn't that be the bucket? Because we see that everywhere. People just don't clean up their input enough. And I'm not hating. I know development's hard, and I know input standardization is hard. I don't let me trivialize it, but doggone it, we really got to put some resources behind getting that comprehensive.
Well, and along the lines to your point, Lee, with developers too, I think I think Jericho mentions this or alludes to it in the article at least, that CWE is a great resource for developers. So if you took any project and you looked at all the CVEs that have been created for that project, and then you looked at the most common CWEs, and then went back to the developers and been like, look, it looks like you really don't understand this class, or your code suffers from this class of vulnerability more so than any other. Let's focus on that, right? And I think that's a positive thing for moving forward, making sure we have more resilient software.
Right. Do you remember a couple of weeks ago, there was an article about what they called unforgivable vulnerabilities, where it was essentially things they categorized as making stupid mistakes, or preventable mistakes, excuse me.
Who published that? Do you remember who published that, Lee? Because I do remember you talking about it. It was like a CISO, or it was a government, U.S. government. Yeah. Well, that was a couple weeks ago.
CISA said, get rid of your buffer overflows or something like that.
From CISA and said we shouldn't have buffer overflows. Okay, we get it. We know that. If we could fix that problem as easily as we make it sound sometimes, we'd be in much better shape. But we have not fixed that problem, unfortunately.
Yep. Well, as you know, compliance is all about how do you make sure nobody is doing something stupid in your organization.
And there's a lot of nuances.
That's not a simple problem.
Guidance on unforgivable defects.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think, even more so than buffer overflow, to me, is authentication bypass. And that's the one that plagues us on especially the network security appliances, web interfaces, in anything that has a web interface, right? In all these IoT devices and network and security appliances have web interfaces. And the vulnerability that gets them all the time is authentication bypass. And that coupled with command injection, because then it can be authenticated. If you can bypass the authentication, an authenticated command injection is beautiful.
Right.
And we see that combination over and over and over again. And it just tells me that either we're not paying attention to it, or we don't have the right facilities to test for it. There's nuances that we're not able to detect in the development process, obviously, or we're just not looking for it in the development process.
Yeah, and do those making sure the right things are done know the right questions to ask? I mean, I think that's what's one of my takeaways from the guidance that they publish, is that this is kind of help you know what to look for that can be prevented. I mean, because I'm not an expert at development. I mean, I know what development is. I got a computer science degree, but that doesn't mean I know what current techniques, or I can appreciate the pressures. But if I was in a job of, say, quality assurance, I would definitely need a primer like this to know what to look for.
Right. Let's switch to privacy for a moment. I know Jeff's not here, but did we talk about Apple pulling data protection from the UK yet? I want to say we didn't.
No,
that came out in between shows, right?
Yes, it
This
did.
is-
We did cover it on Security Weekly News, but
Yeah.
it's an incredibly big topic, and I'd love to spend a lot of time on this one.
Oh, look,
Because it's in the US right now as well, right?
yeah.
Well,
no,
this is, I mean, this is a variation of like the Clipper chip, right? I mean,
Right,
this is
exactly.
the consistent battle that we have between law enforcement and privacy. And as technology evolves, so does this discussion. And both sides of the argument, I think both sides have valid arguments. I think we did talk about this, right? Because going after criminals, the more privacy you have, the more difficult it is to go after criminals, right? So we've constantly got this friction, and there's no easy solution. And then we end up in the UK where they're like, well, no, we need access to people's data because it could be an investigation into a criminal. And then we get into, actually the show 0 Day. That's another theme that they cover in a huge, huge way.
If you have nothing to hide, it shouldn't bother you.
No, I don't buy that at all. And I think a lot of us used to subscribe to that, and I'm like, no, not anymore.
Yeah. Oh yeah, but you do have things to hide, like your
government won't
password, and
take
your credit
advantage
card
of
number,
that.
and your session cookies. But one thing that I saw in one of these articles, one thing I saw here, which is a significant point, is ADP is not turned on by default. So probably almost nobody is actually using it in the UK anyway. So for most users, whether the government breaks it or not isn't really going to matter.
ADP represents storing your data in somebody else's computer that they can't read it.
Right.
And that's important. And I don't know that's still sinking in for a lot of folks, that it really is somebody else's computer and they can read your stuff.
Well, but I think most people, when you make like an iCloud backup, so if you lose your phone, you can buy a new phone and get your stuff back. Most people figures that means I'm trusting Apple to hold all that data.
That's not end-to-end
and
encrypted
they
by
are.
default.
And I think most people are content with that. No, Apple can read it.
Oh,
and
I see.
Most people,
it's encrypted in
we
transit.
just assume Apple can read it, and that's
and it's
okay.
encrypted once it's on your phone. But when it's stored in the cloud, it's not. And Apple could read it, and then they have to get a subpoena or a warrant or whatever.
The iCloud-based backup of your phone doesn't have things like your keychain and other sensitive information in it. If you want to get all that, you have to actually back up to a computer with the password on it that encrypts the backup file. However, you can store a keychain and other things to the cloud if you set up the necessary security
functionality. Yeah.
Okay. Or do you have to enable ADP to store your keychain or no?
No.
Okay.
But
so here's the problem. In the UK, end-to-end encryption is now turned off.
Well, you can't turn it on, but if it's on, you don't have to turn it off until they come after.
No, they've turned it off, is what I understand.
The option's gone. You can't enable it. But
okay,
you don't have
maybe
to
that's what they meant.
Yeah. Right.
Well, they can't undo it for old data because they don't have the key.
The FBI has presented an argument that they're trying to do the same thing here in the US.
Mm-hmm.
That is uncomfortable.
Yeah. So,
of course,
how do you feel
but there's
about,
no other good way to
key only law enforcement can have.
Then there's no other great way to back up your phone like that, right? I'm sure there's other solutions, right? Are they just ignoring the other solutions?
Yeah.
Or are they going to ban all the?
It's the easy way. It's the default way if you have an iPhone.
Yeah. Right.
Well, the problem is if law enforcement has a back door, then it will eventually leak out, and then everybody has
into the back door that was deliberately placed there by law enforcement for telephone conversations named Kalea. That it's not like there's custom malware called Jumbled Path that a Salt Typhoon Chinese-backed gang could break into and listen to phone conversations for years.
Yeah.
Before being detected.
That would make it really hard.
That's just ridiculous. When would that ever happen?
Yeah, it's your door analogy, Joshua. Mm-hmm. You've got an open door somewhere.
Or if it's not open,
now
it's a screen door.
The problem is you got an open door.
Right.
Screen door in a submarine.
But yeah, no, I don't like the idea of crypto backdoors. And I know that there are use cases that are legitimate where they want that data, but most of the time, I think the better win is for people to really be able to protect their data. And
Yeah. I mean, the fact is there are other ways to get it. They can just stick a camera in your room and look at it on your
So we've
screen
been
before
watching
it's
Prime
encrypted,
Target
things like
on,
that.
Well, yeah, well, the Pegasus, right, is that's
yeah, that's
why it was so controversial, because it could circumvent much of the controls that we have on our devices like our iPhones.
from the
And
NSO group, exactly.
and it was proven to be abused in several different cases. And it was also, begs the question, or a good reference related to this story is, I believe it was a Darknet Diaries episode that covered this, that talked about the cellular or phone companies that would make so-called secure phones, and their clientele was exclusively criminals. And this was the one where the FBI, I believe, had compromised the company that made them and had a back door into
They took the company over.
They took the company over and essentially were running the company and spying on all of the criminal activity up until a certain point when they were like, all right, now we have to do something. It made like one of the largest busts in history.
That was a
across
story on PSW like 2 months ago.
It was in the news and everything. I think all the details I got from it was a great job by Jack Resider on Darknet Diaries that went through it, because there's a lot to that story.
Yeah,
company was based in Greece or something. It was multiple companies that did it. Yeah, it's a really, I don't remember which episode it was, Darknet Diaries, but you should go try and find it. It was really good. Yeah. But that's the same thing so like what do criminals do now? Use iPhones with ADP on them instead to not risk going through some other company that could fall into the hands of law enforcement, because Apple's too big to fall in the hands of law enforcement unless you're in the UK, and now they could succumb. Well, I guess there's due process.
It's a due process thing. The entire company didn't fall into the hands of law enforcement, but the ability to access the encrypted storage that Apple holds for you is now in the hands of law enforcement.
Right.
If that happens here in this country, and by the way, just to be clear, Senator Wyden and one of the representatives put out a bill about this, stating that this is absolutely unacceptable. It's anti-democratic. It's anti-security. It's a horrible idea, and it's going to impair the security of the entire civilized world.
What are they hiding on their phones?
And then they're like, and then the FBI is like, hey, can we do that here too? Would that be cool? Oh.
Well, they have to say that. I mean, the FBI has their mission, which is to catch the criminals.
It's always going to be a competing thing. Yep.
So
just like the NSA, I mean, right. I mean, they have legitimate reasons to say we need to get to stuff.
For sure.
So,
and it's always going to be pushed back and forth between the two sides. Not to troll
you all, but did you catch my story number 10, where Google is trying to get rid of SMS as a second factor?
Good.
Yeah.
Well, I think I was.
It sounds like a great idea to me. What do you think of it?
When they updated 863 and they said basically don't use SMS and don't use it's a really bad idea. I'm thinking back then it was SIM swapping, right? Was the big deal, or phone cloning or otherwise. Now we got Salt Typhoon in our everywhere.
Yeah.
Oh, and by the way, back then
that's
single
a great point.
systems SS7 was a challenge. It still is.
Yep.
I think the threat has changed, and it really is time.
Yeah.
However, I don't know if I can back off from the advice of, when enabling multi-factor, if the only option available to you is SMS, do you select it? I think the answer is yes, because it's better than just a static password.
I agree. But with Google, there's probably,
it's a tough one, isn't it, Josh?
But I think Google's on the right path here, because it's going to address the lazy people, myself included, that still have SMS in there and some kind of fallback, right? And I think many of us do, and we're just lazy. At least I'll admit to being lazy, that I haven't fully configured that out, right? In many systems that still have it. Like I kind of just I know I shouldn't have it there, but I leave it there. And I'm like, this is not good. I need to remove it, but I don't want to be locked out of my accounts. And so it's just a matter, you just got to set aside the time to go, these are my multi-factor methods. right? And I'm making sure all of them work, and now I'm going to go disable SMS. And I'm happy to do that. If Google it gives us a nudge to do that, I think that's a great thing in terms of security. I think the push notification is great. Oh, sometimes the push notification doesn't work. It's like, this device isn't online or something like that. And I'm like, so when that happens, I'm like, do I want to disable any of my other fallbacks? Because like, this doesn't always work, but this is one of my favorites because I have to authenticate to my phone. I have to unlock my phone, and I have to push accept in a push notification on my phone.
I like that.
Yeah, and I like that one a lot.
But
yes.
But I think the QR is a really good alternative because you don't need a special app on your phone. It doesn't even need to be your phone. You could borrow somebody's phone.
What's the QR
to do it? I mean, this is almost as good as SMS. It's the fallback that will always work. You're trying to log in, you give it your password, a QR appears on the screen, and you have to scan that QR code
with your phone
to show that you're accepting.
It has to be with your phone. Otherwise, what does it matter?
Well, that's a question.
I have to have my Google account on my phone to scan to scan that QR. It's similar to it's like
it must be
a poor man's push.
Okay, it must be the So I guess it's
but you don't need the
I guess it's the same as a push notification.
Yeah, I like that. I like the QR code.
Here's the problem I have with SMS. If we allow it, everybody does it because it's easy and they're lazy. And it's security theater at this point. It is not actually security. It is just that simple. No, it's not. Because
it's more secure than single factor.
Because of Salt Typhoon.
No, it is.
It is not.
No, because but if you're not the Chinese government, you don't have access to Salt Typhoon. So a whole bunch of attackers can't intercept your SMS. So like any security measure, there are some attackers it stops. Right. And that's a large group, though. Those are people that would like dump a whole password database with SQL injection, then log into all those accounts. All those people can't get in because they'd also need to break the SMS for each of those.
Get rid of it.
So I mean, it's
I agree with you. I think we should get rid of it wholesale. But I was just
security theater. I like the QR codes, by the way.
Yeah, replacing it with these QR codes would be a step forward.
That is an app-less way of doing an app push, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And I think that's wonderful.
And I don't know how many apps have a user validation, not for login, but for doing something, and you'll get an SMS with a code to put in, I mean, I was logging into my pharmacy app, and once after I put in my username and password, they said, I want to send you a code, email or SMS, which was fine. And I had a problem. I had to call them on the phone. I gave them 5 identity validation things. My name, my address, my date of birth.
Yeah.
And there was 2 more. It was like, I counted them up. I'm like, what the, you're more strongly validating either the dang app, which I could actually do this directly in.
So can I point out something? Everybody like, oh, SMS is more secure. Okay, Sam, I'll grant you that for a moment. Just bear with me. But if we don't get rid of it, that's never going to go away. If you go to 2fa.directory and then pick your topic, I don't care which one. Okay.
Yeah.
So numeral 2fa.directory, and you'll see that every damn thing on there practically does SMS. Okay. Every damn thing in gambling, in banking, in whatever does SMS because it's just easy and I'm a lazy fuck.
Ubiquitous.
Well, there was a reason. There was a time when phones didn't have cameras.
Right. That is an excuse.
And that's when you needed
15 years
SMS.
later.
Well,
I know. Now it's over.
I like the QR codes. I think that's
it should just be replaced by these QR codes everywhere. Yeah.
Hey, did you guys see the story about the notorious crooks breaking into a company in 48 minutes, owned everyone? I think Jeff's article. So it's my story number 13, and Jeff covered the same thing. And it said like a different time frame. And essentially what they did.
They're different stories.
Oh, are they different? Okay.
One is a specific crew that broke into a specific place in a specific method in like 40 some odd minutes.
Yep.
One is the average of a lot of different criminal gangs breaking in, where it found out that they can break in on average in 4.5 hours.
So this 48 minutes one was an interesting.
It's a speed run.
Yeah, but it's interesting because they did a diversion attack, which I feel like we talk about, but doesn't happen as much to kind of back up the way we position, the interference, right, kind of attack. So they sent a spam barrage, a very loud one, and it caused everyone basically to go contact over Microsoft Teams the IT help desk. Well, the attackers, turns out, just posed as the IT help desk and then pwned everyone's account.
Of course they did.
Which is, I mean, social engineering at its worst or its finest, however you want to think of it. But it begs, to me, it begged the question, how do we validate who we are internally in the company, right? Smaller companies don't necessarily have this problem, but larger companies, do you know like if you work for a company that has 100,000 employees, do you know every IT worker by their name? No, you don't. And they took advantage of that, right? So how do we provide this validation for IT and the user to be able to validate themselves? It has to go both ways, right? In this case, the employee has to validate the IT worker. How do we do that?
I mean, there's simple things like printing external on the phone screen whenever a phone call comes in, or unverified.
This was done over Teams.
Okay, so external is, a very, very useful label for everybody and every channel in an omni-channel system. This is not an internal person. The call is not coming from inside the house.
Well, I wonder how they got access to the Teams collaboration platform.
Well,
yeah.
So maybe they already had access, or there was some external access
going
to
in.
Teams.
If they allow guest access,
I
mean, how many? If you've been at a Teams meeting where somebody's let in and it says unverified because it's external,
well, here's the thing. I think that they went, "Hey, I'm with IT. Are you all meeting to talk about the spam? Yeah, we've got a meeting going on. Okay, look, here's my email address or here's my whatever. Invite me in, and I'll talk to you all about it so we can get through this really quickly because you're already gathered."
Wow.
Okay. Oh, why is it saying you're unverified? I'm working from home today. They just called me in on an emergency basis to work on this because of the seriousness of the situation. So I'm sacrificing a little PTO to help
from home the way I log in from work. Yeah, okay.
Well, I mean,
no, they already had access. So ReliaQuest did the write up on this, and ReliaQuest said that they speculate that the internal access was purchased, the service account access was purchased from an initial access broker. So it sounds like they had some level of
service
access
accounts
to be able to
usually don't have 2FA.
Is what it sounds like.
Whoever can put up.
Right. This is a fundamental problem everywhere, that the service accounts don't have 2FA.
Whoever can come up with 2FA
because they're automatically connected.
$1 billion.
Yeah.
Yep. Now, and then, yeah. And they mentioned social engineering too. It's like, what?
Well, yeah, of course. What else we got? I'm trying to go through. What was the default password one? Someone had a.
I had a default password one.
Which one was that? It was a device. Yeah. Your story number 5.
Yeah.
This was IoT door access panels. I don't know how I didn't see this article. It was a good find.
That's a good find for your company, Paul. I mean, seriously, that's terrifying.
Yeah.
People don't realize that door access panels and access control systems are mostly IoT based and microcontroller based.
I have it on my slide of things in the enterprise that are firmware based systems, and building access is one of them.
And have you ever seen the badging computer at a large company? It's at least 3 generations behind on operating systems.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
So either way you cut it, door access is a cluster.
It's one of those provided by the vendor, you can't update it kind of situations. Yeah. You're right.
So that was one of the things I was thinking about, is that, more and more companies are working to have their products not, or force you to change the default password.
Right.
But not everybody's there. And I'm thinking, how many years have we been saying when you do an install, change all the default passwords, and for the approximately the same amount of time, minus a very small number of people don't. Or maybe is it plus a small number? I don't know. And also, like, a lot of the vulnerability scanners will scan for default credentials because they're well known. And are people looking at that? Because I don't know. But this was kind of scary. The information you could get out of this thing, I was like, what the hell? Where was it? It was what was it? I'm looking for the data. I didn't capture that.
What, on a door access panel? Typically,
Yeah,
you
the
can get a
kind of data
roster
that
of the
was
entire
in there was
company.
crazy.
You can get the credentials, a copy of their badge,
Yeah.
because it stores a cached database in case the power goes out. It still lets people out or in.
Mm-hmm.
So think of it as a cached copy, like of Active Directory, effectively.
Yeah.
You get usernames and passwords. You get, depending on how they've done it, you can even
residents'
get
full names and their unit numbers, so you know who's living
Yep.
in which unit. So now you can target.
like it's a lot of times phone numbers, because remember, a lot of residential buildings have that thing where you type their name and it calls them, that type of thing.
Yep.
And
They
that's
did
the
get a
intercom
CV
these days.
They got a CVE assigned to it. 2025-26793.
A current one.
And MITRE assigned did the assignment and assigned a 10.0 critical.
Yeah.
And how often do you think those panels are updated?
Not very often.
Ever. Never,
If
ever.
Right? It's one of those things
No.
you set it and forget it. You set it up.
It worked in 2004. Why are we touching it? It's not broken.
Yep.
Yeah, door access
But the
panels
vendor
are
refused to
crap.
do anything about it, which is interesting.
No, you wait. Let me explain why. Because if the vendor does something about it, announces it, talks about it, says anything, they now have 17,000 clients who are going to come screaming and saying, it's your fault.
Mhm.
You need to fix it for me or replace it at your cost. Because you've got facilities people, not cybersecurity
No, yeah,
people
you're
or
right.
IT people, who go, all right, shit, I got to do an update. What's the, we're used to it. Facilities people, like, something's wrong with it. You're going to do a recall, right? I need a new set. When is it
Well,
going to
yeah,
get here?
You need
And
to
you're going
come
to pay
out
me
and you need
$5,000
to come out and do a support and change my password for me.
for free.
Mm-hmm.
I'm willing to take out the 2 mounting screws and unplug the plug and plug a new one back in.
But you got to send me a new one for free.
Bingo.
And then when it comes online, it should prompt them for a password to set for the device.
Yes.
Bingo.
Which is what they failed to do in this case, which is something we've talked about for a really long time.
Yeah. So
It's a cultural difference. That's the problem.
Mm-hmm.
And as a matter of fact, I will even tell you that if they did the thing you just said, Paul, which is, hey, you've just plugged me in. Please set a master password or root password or admin something like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then set up your sub passwords and whatever else you need. They would be like, wait, I have to plug this into a computer first? I just plug it in and then doors just work.
Mm.
No.
Well, yeah,
They
it's
just
always
wanna
been
mash the
it's always
next
been a
button.
support issue, right?
Absolutely. It's a nightmare of a support issue that is not going to change until we change culture in the physical security world.
Right. And if they do set a master password, how many of them are going to use them for the same one for every device?
Well, but then it's on the
All of them.
organization, right? And then it's not on the vendor. Now it's on
No, it's
it's
not,
on
but
you, right?
Yeah. Well, people pick the easy button, whatever they think the easy button is going to be.
Well, that's the problem we have. Even if the next generation of these devices come out and they fix this problem, it's too late. They've already got it deployed, right?
Yeah.
With the default password and how many
Right.
instances.
so
and even if
let me
they
ask you
did
a
the right thing and did they send a notification out to
I don't think so.
their customers and say, please change this default password? It says
think
it
so,
in
but I could have missed
the
it.
timeline. I thought it said something about that. They're not following the recommendations.
Yeah, they're not following the instructions. Not our fault. It doesn't
No
look like they're
response.
notifying anybody.
Let me ask you a question. Paul, you deal with a lot of IoT devices, like a lot of them, right?
Well, mostly on the enterprise, but we call it enterprise IoT sometimes.
Okay.
But yeah.
Enterprise IoT, OT, whatever. How many of them still use default credentials? How many of them are updated rarely to never? And how many of them go, what, we have devices? How many of the people don't understand that those are actually computers effectively? They just think they're, bimetal.
It's a firewall, it's a VPN,
thermocouples.
it's a camera, it's a whatever, right? It's not a computer. This is the problem that we have. and I talk about this in my presentations in my webinar tomorrow, right? We'll touch on it, that we treat these devices as devices, not as computer systems.
But they're
In other words,
computers.
when we bring in a Microsoft Windows system, we change a lot of the defaults, right? We set passwords. We even put software on top of Microsoft Windows to attempt to make it more secure in the form of EDR and patch management. But for some reason, when we get other kinds of computer systems, they're not held to the same standard. And in fact, in most cases, we can't add additional software because the firmware is encrypted, because root level access is locked out. So not only are we not adding any software, we don't have that visibility either, right? Go back to Sophos. We deployed a kernel level implant to basically spy on bad people doing bad things with our products. And it's like, wait, why can't I do that with any of the devices I deploy in my environment? Well, I can't, because I'm locked out, because there's founders and CEOs that post on Reddit that say, if anyone, roots a customer's device without permission, they'll be fired. It makes jokes about it, that like this deeper level of access is a closely guarded thing, when most of these things are PCs running Linux, right? And so, like, would you take a Linux box and just go, oh, I'm just gonna go hang it out on my network, I don't need to make any changes to it? No, you're gonna change passwords, set access controls, update the operating system, put software on them that's going to monitor for malware and malicious behavior. Of course you're going to do that. But we don't do that with these appliances and devices, building access systems included, cameras, whatever.
It's utter crap. It's utter crap. It's a cultural issue. We don't see them as computers. We see them as solid state. Don't need to touch it.
But I think it's why we buy
forever devices.
But I think it's why we buy them, because we don't want that level of responsibility, right? We're like, I want a VPN, I want a camera, and I want to plug it in, and I want it to be a VPN or a camera. I don't want to have to deal with anything else under the covers, because I've got my ERP system and a whole bunch of other stuff that I do have to do a lot of that care and feeding for. And I want to buy these appliance-based systems where I shouldn't have to do that level of care and feeding, except you do, right? That's the cultural difference, Josh. It is a cultural thing.
I agree. But how do we change that?
Standards, laws, guidelines are one thing. That when you deliver these devices, they should allow the customer, or should be two things, held to a standard of security, right? That we hold a lot of other things to, but for some reason we don't when we buy an appliance, and afford us some level of visibility and monitoring.
Paul Asadorian has decreed the standard shall be passed down.
Well,
you could also get dumb devices.
I'd have to leave my desk, man.
Right? Yeah.
What's wrong with you?
I have to log into my building management system to revoke access, to add access, to change access, right? So it has to be connected, maybe not to the internet. Some people probably do, but it has to be connected to a network where someone can reach it. Otherwise, I have to like physically go to a thing, and that's inconvenient.
Well, but Paul, you danced around the other elephant in the room, and that is the culture change needed to perform those updates. Not such a big, to get them secure out the door, although appliances really should be that close. But then that they're willing to go take the downtime and keep them updated. That's a culture change. A lot of that stuff.
No, I agree. It is what you're bringing up is very much like the cloud, right? In the shared responsibility model.
Yeah.
I don't want to absolve the enterprise users, right, or consumers of this gear from all security responsibility. You still do have responsibilities when it comes to security of these devices,
of course.
But the manufacturers do as well. And I think both sides have to up their game. Again, when we take these like boxes and we just plug them into our networks, you should be able to have to do things as well. You should be updating them more frequently. But on the vendor side, the updates should be more resilient and robust as well, which would help with the problem. I think that's a cultural. We've all been burnt by a firmware or appliance update, right? Firmware starts to get a looser term. right? Like I updated my OpenSense firewall today. I mean, yeah, it's firmware, but it's BSD, right? It's a it's a Unix or BSD, I should say, operating system, but it's treated like more of an appliance thing. So, there's that. ThreatLocker implements a least privilege approach to cybersecurity, blocking every executable unless specifically authorized by your team. This methodology mitigates ransomware, supply chain attacks, and zero-day exploits, and ensures protection for your organization 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. To learn more about how ThreatLocker can help prevent known and unknown threats in your digital environment, safeguard your data and operations from threat actors, and align your organization with respected compliance frameworks, visit securityweekly.com/ThreatLocker.
What's the BSD patch rate like these days? I mean, it used to be pretty low.
Oh, there's still regular advisories and updates and things like that for sure. Because when I updated OpenSense, it did say there were bug fixes and security fixes related to the underlying FreeBSD that they were using. Yeah. And the more you get behind, the less like you are to go through the update process because the more friggin' painful it is.
Oh, yeah.
I guess PF Sense, right? It's super old. And I'm like, I'm getting ready to retire it rather than go through the work of updating it.
You'd rather start new. I mean, so minor thing, I have a Blackmagic A10 Mini Pro that I haven't used in probably, 3, 4, 5 years. And I pulled it out because I was setting up my teleprompter in a proper Canon XA40 and things like that. And to just get back actually to feeling like I'm actually vaguely professional at this. I don't know. It's a thought. And the A10 wasn't working. And I was busting my head like, what? And finally, I plugged it back in, downloaded the control software, and it immediately goes, oh, you're like 17 versions behind.
Oh, boy.
It took it a while, but it updated and automatically updated. I give it credit. It did a great job. Like I didn't even have to say anything. It just went, I'm updating.
So your A10 updated?
My A10 Mini Pro updated.
Yep.
Multiple times. And then all of a sudden there was picture on the screen.
Yeah.
Yay.
I've supported a lot of ATEM gear in the past 20 years or so. And knock on wood, like updates have been pretty solid.
Oh, it's beautiful. I literally hadn't plugged this thing in I don't even remember. No, at least 2.5 years, if not 3 years.
Well, I mean, I just took some of my systems from Ubuntu 2004 to 2404, and the Ubuntu systems went fine. The Raspbian system, not so much. And in fact, many of the guides I read said, rather than doing this update like in place, you should really just reinstall everything. Like, seriously, that's what it suggested. I'm like,
it's easier,
well,
isn't it?
let me try it, and it failed. But Ubuntu, I was able to jump from release to release because Ubuntu, you have to go 2004 to 2204, 2204 to 2404, and it's painful. Like when you get that behind on things. But I'm like, I want to update these systems, and I did, and worked. But again, Raspbian was not.
I'm on it
very
now.
well could have been user error, but.
The A10 was brilliant. It did it. As soon as I downloaded the control software and the control thing, it hooked up. I didn't even have to hook up RJ45. It hooked up over USB. Found it. I clicked on it. It went, oh, ew.
Yeah.
Updated it. I'm on it right now. I love having it back.
I did want to talk about my story number 17.
Oh yeah. Oh, that was a good one. Yeah.
There's a couple more that I mentioned at the top that I want to cover.
Pwn everything?
Yeah, pwn everything. So this is from Quarks Labs. I love the folks at Quarks Labs. Good friends there. Hi, Yvonne. So this post was amazing in its own right based on technical details. What I really loved about it, especially as a great talking point, is that you can be running, and this is a use case specifically from this post, you can be running older software and even think that your older software has been patched, but someone comes along and finds new/old vulnerabilities that are exploitable in it. So I don't believe this was necessarily a new vulnerability they found, but they found a vulnerability and figured out a different way to exploit it that wasn't included in the patched version. And this is like a really old PHP MyAdmin instance, right? and they were able to exploit it. And so my thing is like how we treat older software, whether it's been end of life or end of service from the vendor or open source project or not, I think it needs to change. I think we run under the assumption, well, if I've updated it to the best that I can update it and it's old but it's still working, then I'm good until someone like Quark Labs comes along and goes, wait, 6-year-old software hasn't been a new release of that software in 6 years, which means there hasn't been any public vulnerabilities disclosed. 6-year-old software, I bet there's vulnerabilities in there. And look, I mean, and they based it on something that was already patched. But even still, I think older software is a liability in the fact that it's old, even if there are no published or known vulnerabilities in it. That could be a lot of different reasons for that, right?
I'm trying to remember how long ago it was. I think it was 2007, 2008. Jeremiah Grossman told me that there are new vulns in new code, old vulns in new code, new vulns in old code, and old vulns in old code.
Correct.
And I was like, okay. And as silly as that sounds, I had to sit down and think about it. And I'm like, oh shit, that's bad. And he went,
It's
yeah.
bad. It's bad. It's bad because, and I think a lot of researchers, such as myself, I don't necessarily go after the older software because my inclination is that if I report a vulnerability in older software, the manufacturer or responsible company for that software is going to go, well, we don't support that anymore. Like, it's an invalid,
end of life,
invalid finding, and I'm going to have a big fight on my hands. So when I go look for bugs, I go look for bugs in newer software that is supported, that is part of the bug bounty program, that is receiving updates. Because if I do find something, it's going to be a finding, right? And more likely that someone's going to pay attention to it. But as a defender, now I'm like, old software is bad. And I was having this conversation at work, and I have like an MSI laptop that I bought in 2020. Has not, UEFI update has not been published for it since then.
Mine is in a box because of that, yes.
And I'm like, wait a minute. You're telling me have they released an official, this is not supported any longer? I'm not sure. I haven't checked in some time. But that's that's an indicator. If your software is 5 years old and the manufacturer has not released any updates for it in 5 years, and maybe they've ended life, maybe they haven't, let's say they haven't, to me, that's a liability. We need to be pointing that out, right? Because as this blog post in my story number 17 says, someone could come along and exploit that stuff.
Right.
And to me, that's the worst case, because it's that dusty corner, right? It's that dusty corner that you never go in and clean up. But it's going to come back to bite you.
And it's worse. I mean, I was looking at a WordPress site I have, and my security software said, dude, this plugin is like abandoned. It's so old.
Yes. Abandoned is it. I would put it in this category too. Yes.
Yeah. And
it is
like,
essential.
so
I mean,
you
MSI basically
dumbass.
abandoned that UEFI, right?
Yeah.
It is. It's abandonware.
But unless you're looking for it, you don't know. I mean,
yeah, and keeping track of what's been end of life, end of service, end of support, the whole thing is a nightmare, because I had to do that with Palo Alto. I had to figure out which versions were supported, which ones weren't, which hardware was supported up until which version, and is that version supported. It was like a lot of clicking and reading through a bunch of websites, right? There needs to be better tooling that we have to point that out. There is an open source project. I didn't put a link in there, but there's an open source project that attempts to track some of this. And there are some efforts to do it, but I feel like it's something we don't talk about as much.
Is this one a point where I'm supposed to say something like SBOM?
Well, that's a great point in identifying where you have older software.
You got to know what you have.
I didn't say it. I just want to point out I didn't say it.
But it's all about how you can generate SBOMs all day long. But what do you need to look for? To your point, Lee, older software is a great thing to look for in your SBOMs.
I agree.
Yeah.
So the SBOM gives you what's the data, what's there, and now you got to go figure out whether that list is okay or not.
Yes.
And the VEX project, the Vulnerability Exchange project, along with various vendors, will help you do that.
Age is a good thing. Like age since last update of that software.
Age since last update is the last update a valid one? When was the last time it was tested? Who is the maintainer of the software? These are incredibly useful things to know.
we tend to focus on all like software that has published vulnerabilities. When we're just scratching the surface. I think it was years ago, Josh Coleman and I did similar research independently and then shared notes of the CVEs are just a portion of the things that we have to address. It's not all the vulnerabilities in the universe, right? It's only a subset. And here's some great examples we give, I think, of areas you got to pay attention to. The other one was dangerous AI tools. Someone, I don't know whose story was that? Was it Sam's?
I think it was Sam. I'm scrolling.
Someone downloaded, I think it was Sam's. Yeah, Disney worker downloaded an AI tool, and it led to a hack that ruined his life. This was a Wall Street Journal article.
Oh, this was bad.
Bad. Free software to create images from text prompts, but that software was backdoored. And not detected by AV. Attacker gained access to 1Password. Private data was published. 44 million internal Disney Slack messages were published, and he lost his job. That's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, gosh, I mean,
can you imagine that many Slack messages? They had that means they have a paid Slack.
Yeah,
and
they have a big Slack.
A big Slack, and their retention period is forever. And it's unbelievable. And so yeah, the dude lost his job, but he's forever going to be known by this. This is going to define him for 10 years at least. Poor guy.
It's interesting though. It says the antivirus software that was on his PC didn't find anything, but then he installed a second antivirus program and it found the malware almost immediately. So is that his failure, or is it the failure of the IT team, or is it the failure of the antivirus vendor, or all of the above? I think everyone shares some responsibility in
plenty
this.
to go around.
I never lean towards firing someone for something like this, because had he kept his job, he would have been the most diligent about security out of any employee of Disney after this, right? And so I would keep the part. Everyone makes mistakes, right?
Disney has a habit of, if there's a problem, you're gone.
Yep. No, I agree. I agree.
Because there's such a line of people waiting to get in. They can basically replace just about anybody in 10 seconds.
I've not heard good things about Disney park workers. Have not shared great stories about working there.
Disney park workers, they love their jobs.
Right? It was 2600, I think, had articles that talked about the underground tunnels and stuff. But I want to say those articles also kind of reference like it wasn't that great of a place to work.
I think it's sometimes mostly it depends on what you do. A lot of it's good, but some of it isn't. I mean, it says near the end that he lost his health insurance and $200,000 in bonuses. And he's still having to deal with all this crap. He's called the cop. Everybody's, going after him. His two-factor stuff is fine, but this guy is going through hell. It looks like he severely violated what was done was a violation of their policies, but did he really that badly break the rules with Disney? He installed a single package that he shouldn't have.
Was it on his personal phone? Was it on a corporate phone? Was it on a
I think it's a laptop,
I don't know.
But even so, was it personal or corporate?
Was it a laptop? Okay, then corporate laptop.
Yeah,
that
sounds like
if it was a corporate laptop and he downloaded a package and installed it. My question is actually, how did he do that?
Why was that allowed?
Why was that allowed? That's actually if I misread that then. If it was a laptop, a corporate owned and managed laptop, and he downloaded a package, how did that happen?
Right. Yeah. How did he? Well, or how did he install it? Right. I mean, because this thing
shouldn't have been able to install
operating in privileged space.
Was he an admin?
Probably.
If he was an admin and he used his admin creds to install a package, fire him. Sorry, he's done. But if he wasn't an admin and had or wasn't a legitimate admin, like not a IT admin, but had admin creds or privileged creds, why did he have that?
But also there's a responsibility to whoever's distributing that software. They got hacked, right? There's some responsibility to be shared there too.
Yeah, he had admin. As it says, his antivirus software didn't turn anything on his PC, but he installed a second antivirus program. Boom, boom, need admin, which did find it.
So he had admin creds.
Yeah.
Maybe he was an IT person.
He had to have been an IT person. And in that case, to be very honest with you, on a corporate laptop, like he broke the rules so many ways from Sunday.
Yeah. And even if it's, you're not an IT person, if you've been granted admin, there's usually some rules around that. It's not just, go and sin no more. It's, you can do this and this. And if you do this, we're going to come after you with extreme prejudice. I still feel for all the stuff he went through. I mean, because this wasn't a malicious attempt.
No.
But it's still a screw up on his part. But doggone it.
Yeah. The last story I had was updating Pi-hole. Pi-hole's a great program. And Scott Helm had a great post that talked about how to enable HTTPS on it, right? So go that extra mile. And Pi-hole's a great thing. It's just a reminder I need to get back to it. I had done some installs of Pi-hole in the past and then moved on from it, but it's something I need to get back to.
I can't install it on my network unless I start segregating my network, because my wife works from home and has a VPN. So it doesn't work. They don't mesh well, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, I got to think about how I re-implement that, right?
So I'm gonna have to put her on her own VLAN, basically.
Again, this is, I think we were talking about this, the cobbler in his children's shoes is often a good analogy.
I don't want to do this stuff.
Our network's like, oh God, I gotta like spend time on my own network. Right?
Yeah. I've got a switch that's dying. I'm getting new switches in. So I've got to install switches in the next couple of days.
Yep.
Whine, groan.
I know.
But no, putting a Pi-hole in the network is a great idea, especially because
this is how I end up with systems I maintain that are on 2004.
Because you don't want to maintain them.
Right.
No, I don't know. And I've got other projects I've got to do around the house, but like I'm putting in a phone system, and because I want my kids to realize what a dial tone is, for God's sakes, as stupid as that sounds. And I'm putting a rotary phone in. Got to have a rotary phone.
Oh yeah. Oh,
have you
a rotary phone that's really sending clicks, or a rotary phone with one of those DTMF adapters?
It's going to have an adapter at the switch.
Yeah.
It's going to be a VoIP phone. So on the rotary phone, you have the dial-in IP address.
Yeah.
One at a time.
What I thought was really neat about this Pi-hole update is he doesn't just talk. He talks. This is really about setting up an Acme certificate, so it's automatically updated. Not just you set it up and then you got to go through this ringer again. He's telling you
is he using Let's
Encrypt?
Encrypt?
Keep it going. No, he's not using Let's Encrypt, but he is using Acme, like acme.sh and stuff.
Right.
Okay. Yeah, they'll do it too. Yeah, that works. Same idea.
Yeah. So it's
that's
I just think it's very cool that he went to that. So it's not just, it's going to stay that way and keep itself happy. I mean, I use Let's Encrypt. I love that.
I use Let's Encrypt because I'm familiar with it at this point, but I got so many damn systems I have to set up around this house. I'm going to run out of outlets before I run out of things to do. Let's put it that way.
No hating in there. I'm just saying, when I started messing with it, it was like, whoa, this is kind of cool. And I wish it would work other places, but whatever. Use it where you can, right? I was
telling you guys before the show, I did Tailscale is great too. They don't sponsor
I'm actually
the show.
Thinking of setting one up. How hard was that to set up?
It's pretty easy. And I can't believe the free account that they have. And again, they sponsor a lot of podcasts. They don't sponsor this podcast, but I'll give them a plug because I heard it on another podcast and I use it and I really love it because it takes away a lot of the headache of setting up your own VPN and lets you manage it, and you get a certain amount like for free. And so for managing the studio network and in my own network, it works so well, and I don't have to expose stuff to the internet anymore. And I have connectivity between all my systems in a secure manner. It's great.
So what you're saying is Tailscales should sponsor this podcast.
They should sponsor it. Absolutely. They should.
Tailscale, if you're listening.
I'm a big fan.
Just saying.
I'm a huge fan. Huge fan. Awesome. Well, that will conclude this episode of Paul Security Weekly. Thanks everyone for listening and watching. We'll see you next time. Over and out.